Hi, everybody. Welcome to episode number 36. We made it actually 36 episodes, which is astonishing, of the Fitness Devil podcast. If you're actually watching this video, this is Andrew Coates right here. I'm waving here. This is Dean, this creature, curly hair looking thing there. If you're just audio, then completely ignore that. So we've got Brad Dieter on today. He's a PhD, really brilliant and awesome fitness professional. He's got his hands in a lot of academic research, but also practical systems to help clients. So today we're going to talk about the future of the fitness industry, how technology will shape it, some talk about AI, artificial intelligence. He gets into his hypothesis about intolerances and how people are driven to them. You got to listen to check that out. He mentions DNA testing and its validity or perhaps lack thereof. We got a few great quotes in here. You can't hate yourself lean. You got to check out what he meant by that. And a pretty healthy discussion about internet arguments and why they're a big fucking waste of time. So enjoy the episode. It's actually one of our best ever. And stay tuned.
Shut up and sit down.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the podcast. I'm Andrew Coates. Dean Guido is here with me. If you're watching on video, you'll see us. We're going to do videos now on YouTube, but we're not actually that important when it comes to this. It's always our guests, and we managed to pull a lot of really well-educated people somehow. And we got another one today. We got Brad Dieter joining us. He's a PhD in exercise physiology. Although he's far too youthful looking and in reality to have achieved as much education as he has, which is pretty impressive. So, Brad, thanks for coming on. I was hoping that you could introduce yourself, your full academic history, and your role with sciencedriven.com.
Yeah, well, I guess I'll start with the disclaimer that I'm obviously the smallest person here right now. So we'll just put that up there. Too. Yeah, so that's the good juxtaposition. So my background, I won't go too far deep into it and waste a lot of time, but basically I did my undergrad, decided I didn't want to go to med school, went into research, did my master's in essentially exercise physiology, where I focused mostly on, musculoskeletal mechanics and biomechanics, and then decided I was more interested in physiology and kind of more disease and how exercise impacts disease. So I did a PhD in basically how exercise affects the molecular mechanisms of disease, and I focused in diabetes and diabetic cardiomyopathy. And then I did a postdoc fellowship in diabetic kidney disease, so I just make the joke that I just went south in the body, and finished that up about, a little over a year ago, and I'm currently, part of my academic life is I'm a research scientist, so I do biomedical research work for part of my life, and then I also, over the last several years, have been a co-owner in running Eat to Perform, and running my personal blog is Science Driven Nutrition, where all the stuff that I am interested in, but my wife doesn't really care enough to hear about, I write it and put it online for people. So, yeah, those are kind of the big things I'm doing, and kind of where I've come from and where I am now.
That sounds like the combination of several different people and all of their pursuits. When we met, I was sort of blown away with just how many things you were involved with very seriously. So it's just sort of awe-inspiring.
That's what happened when you're in school for, how old are you?
I just turned 30.
Just turned 30 as a PhD.
He's a baby, right?
I'm 30, but I don't...
You're a baby.
I only... Yeah. My schooling is far less advanced.
That just means you spent your 20s doing fun things and not stuck in the library or in a basement somewhere.
I was stuck playing football, getting told C's get degrees.
Hits to the head.
Yeah, C's get degrees, and they don't get you into PhD school. So if I wanted to, I had the rude awakening. I had to go upgrade. So I just learned my PhD on the internet. So I'm just as smart as you on the internet. So just no certificate.
A Google university degree.
A Google PhD.
There's a lot of those floating around.
Yeah. So, what are you working on currently? So, just give us a rundown of business, academia, and I guess just more on your brand, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I'll start with probably the more relatable stuff. So at each Perform, we basically, and kind of the way I describe it is, right now there's kind of two ways that people approach kind of nutrition and exercise coaching. Essentially, is you've got the really passive systems like Fitbit, MyFitnessPal. They basically you can put in your data, and they kind of say, hey, maybe walk more, or maybe try to eat this calorie count, and that's really all they do. And then you've got the very high end intensive coaching with individual coaches, that are very kind of interactive. They don't have a whole lot of formal data collection. Some people do, and it's kind of a high dollar point, and it's high communication. And so what we've done at each Perform, on a high level, is we've taken both those and merged those together. So we have all of the passive data collection, the MyFitnessPal data, the Fitbit data, the Apple data, the Garmin data, and then we've built custom coaching software that then allows us to take the coaching and apply it to those data things, and have kind of built out this whole system of how do we take humans and technology and leverage the strengths of both and really put them together in kind of a powerful system. So that's what we're doing there. And that's been really cool to see. We kind of built this whole thing from the ground up, so we've kind of got to customize everything we've done and built it around our clients, which is pretty cool for us. So that's that piece. So we can kind of dive into more of that in a little bit.
Yeah.
On the academic research side, so my focus is primarily in diabetes and end organ complications. So right now we have a lot of different lines of research going. Some of it is biomarker development. So how can we take, proteins or, any small molecules that are in your blood or your urine and predict how people either basically try to identify people whose disease will progress or won't progress. And are there things that we can tell that differentiate those people? And then we're also trying to develop novel therapies for a lot of these, end organ complications of disease. And one of the things that we've learned over the last several years is, we kind of lump disease categories, right? Like we call heart disease, or we call kidney disease. And amongst those, there's actually a lot of different types. And so what we're trying to do is phenotype these types and develop targeted therapies. So it's kind of like taking steps towards personalized medicine. So we do a lot of human studies, animal studies, very basic, molecular biology studies to try to figure those things out.
I just saw a headline, and actually I didn't read the article, just things have been so busy lately, but something about, it was in the news, how there are actually 5 different types of diabetes versus 2. And that was just a headline I saw. Is that true? Is there something to that, or is that kind of the news being sensational bullshit?
I think that I don't really have a super solid answer for how many different types there are. I think, it's one of those things that, and this is very similar to how science progresses, is we take this thing we see and we slap a label on it. And then as we start to understand more, we start to find the nuances in it. A good analogy for kind of this field would be, training, right? Is you can say, okay, there's strength training, but then under strength training, there's, powerlifting style training, there's more volume style training, there's all this other sorts of stuff. So, even the type 2 diabetes moniker, people have different manifestations of that too. And so we're starting to try to understand that. Are there really 5 types? I don't really know. I don't think we've gone super far down that hole, but I do think there is a lot of diversity amongst people who have a quote-unquote type 2 diabetes diagnosis.
See, when I heard him explain it, I heard novel approaches, and I just thought, with my internet PhD, the novel approach, and this is held quite strongly by a lot of the world, is keto will fix all of it.
Well, actually, that launches into something that I think is a better clarification of this, because Brad and I talked about this in Spokane, and there's this whole debate. There's a researcher, but actually, this is straight up serious. There's a researcher who's been doing a lot of stuff and pushing a lot of keto as a cancer cure, very unilaterally, which is very dubious because people think of cancer. I'll use an example. Anyone who's got the government's suppressing a cure for cancer or cannabis and all this kind of crazy crap. And they're failing to actually appreciate the fact that there are a really large number of very different types of cancers that manifest in really different ways. And not all of them are, some of them are fueled by carbohydrates, some of them are fueled by fat. Brad, you could probably do a lot more justice to that explanation.
Yeah, that's one of the hard parts to really try to get across to people is, cancer it's a blanket term for a lot of different types of diseases, right? Each one has its own genotype, its own phenotype, its own metabolism. Some are fueled by carbohydrates, some are fueled by fatty acids, some are fueled by ketones, some are fueled by they will take the nucleic acids that are floating around in your blood and will metabolize those. So, it's just like saying, basically just giving people ketones or having a ketogenic diet is going to have any effect on their, blanket statement cancer is really kind of super myopic in my opinion.
That's good. And I like stuff like this because this gives people interesting takeaways for the stuff that they kind of hear floating around, but they may not necessarily have the knowledge or the context to be able to understand. And people, they seek simple solutions. They love one simple answer, and they want to believe there's this one thing. Or that, like I said, the government is suppressing, there's this worldwide conspiracy because pharmaceutical companies won't make money off of curing all cancers because people who study cancer and their families don't ever get cancer or die of it. Like, some of the logic there's a little speeches, and there's going to be one listener here who's going to be freaking the living hell out. No, there's a conspiracy. Like, no,
I mean,
on Netflix, fucking right.
Yeah, the real answer there is we're just too dumb to figure it out.
Yeah, we don't.
We haven't figured it out.
There was someone who's saying we don't even know half the CNS shit that people are talking about. We don't even know a fifth of what's going on in the brain. And the same thing with all this shit. We could bring smart people on like you, and you're 30. Hopefully by 50 you'll find something way smarter than what's out now.
And hopefully I'm still alive by then. Yeah, it's like we just had Sarah Ashburn.
40, yeah, by the way.
Yeah. So Sarah Ashburn was on, and I actually mentioned Sarah when we were talking. And so Sarah's on the forefront of a lot of gut health, gut microbiome stuff. And that stuff is an industry, as a study, is in its infancy too. So there's a whole lot of stuff there that we just don't know yet. So.
Okay, we need to talk about AI. So give them the AI one, because we kind of brought up stuff about emerging technology, and I would say that you're kind of on the forefront of integrating a lot of that stuff. So
yeah, and that's why this is actually a lot about what this episode is going to be about. A lot of what you described working on within your business, it really got me thinking about the future of our fitness industry, particularly when it comes to nutrition. Companies, emerging technologies work to really disrupt the industry as it's been for a while. And what you described sort of sounds along those lines. So what technologies do you see changing the way our industry functions to serve the end consumer better? And how will they change it?
Oh, that's a big question, and what we're trying to figure out, right? That's ultimately my exit strategy in life, right? Is figure out that and then retire on a boat somewhere. I think it's twofold. One is, as we start to bring in, we'll use the word artificial intelligence because that's just what people understand. But as we start to bring in more objective mathematical tools to understanding a lot of what human behavior actually is, I think that's going to start to illuminate a lot of things that we don't understand, right? So, for example, we collect all this data on our clients, and what we see people actually doing in the real world and how their bodies are responding in the real world is much different than what you see in the research literature. And that's been very eye-opening for me, right? I've probably read all the weight loss studies that there are out there. And while those concepts are very crystal clear, when you try to take those same things and apply them to the real world, they really break down. And they break down in a very big fundamental way that changes how you approach things. So I think as we can start to unleash a lot of, some of these AI tools, so to speak, on real world data, we're going to learn a lot of things that we did not know. So that would be the first thing, is I think it's going to kind of remove a lot of our biases as coaches. And one of the big things that I kind of push back against is, this idea that if people aren't losing weight, it's because our clients are lying to us, right? There's kind of this big theme of, hey, if you're saying you're eating 1,000 calories and you're not losing weight, you're not really eating that. That's the type of kind of bias we have from our approach is, how can real world data help kind of remove our bias of how we approach those type of people? So that's kind of one example. And then the way I kind of view it is using these tools to kind of leverage our ability to help people and remove our bias. And they're going to allow humans to do a lot more of the caring piece, right? Because if you think about your relationship with your clients, is all this information and tools to get your clients results is really, really helpful. But if you don't actually care about your clients and you don't have the time and the energy to actually, connect with them on an emotional human level, then you're going to really miss a lot of the opportunity to change people's lives. So that's kind of the way I would hope that it ends up being, is these AI tools can kind of give us more leverage and give us more powerful interventions that are more effective, and actually take the burden off of us to try to solve these problems, and we can do a lot more of the human interaction. So that's kind of the way I would hope to see it go. Now, is that the way it's going to go? I don't know. I don't know if humans are capable of doing that kind of stuff or not.
And I think like right now, even if you look at Fitbit, it's kind of all the technology's going where the money's at and where people are going to be at right now. So I don't even know if people want that. They want to know how many steps they're taking so that they can get a little bit more, and then they're going to market off that, and then we're going to be stuck in a loop for 10 years.
And Fitbits, here's what I kind of feel about Fitbits. Fitbit, it can be a very valuable piece of information, or step trackers or whatever, but people more often than not will buy the Fitbit basically the way that they buy gym memberships. That's the big gesture that alleviates the emotional distress of how they've been feeling, but it comes with no actual exertion or real effort. So it's sort of a symbol of, hey, look at me, I did this big thing, but it's not the thing that's actually going to change your life or get the weight off. And what they have to do is they actually have to go out and do the effort. But again, just buying that technology or buying that membership, they feel like, hey, I've done something big, and that's what it takes to lose weight. No, fuck no. You actually have to like exercise, and you have to.
I wanted to go more on the lines of asking you kind of, so we talked about even the Fitbit and why people want that. How can we make the stuff you're talking about, because you're talking about better metrics, better systems, AI, doing more. How do we get the greater community involved with that so that companies want to build out that shit so they can make money? Because that's literally what's going to come down to is there going to be a want and a desire for it? And scientists and trainers aren't a big enough market to make that move happen. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Part of me says I don't want anybody, stepping on my turf right now.
Yeah, you want to retire in a boat, man?
The bigger question there is like, and I think you asked the right question is, and this is kind of my underlying argument of how we solve the bigger kind of obesity problem, and is a value structure, right? Is how do you from the bottom up build this value structure? And there's kind of a few ways you can do it. Is you can start at the top and make this a very large financial industry that can somehow use that to drive consumer behavior. A good analogy is, look at the NFL, right? Like, that's a huge money-making organization that starts with money at the top and then drives consumer behavior of, get your cable package, buy your Bud Light, hang out on Sundays, go to Buffalo Wild Wings. Or there's the other approach of how can we change the value structure at the bottom to where people actually value something, and then you can build the financial institution on top of it. And so if you look historically, it usually works from the top down. But I think if you actually want to enact some sort of large social change, you have to start from the bottom up. And how we do that second piece is the Nobel Prize winning question.
That's your boat, man. That's your $2 million yacht in the Mediterranean, and you're making money.
Well, I think we're probably in the best situation in our history for that, what you described from bottom up, because and again, it's driven by the connectivity of social media and just the general connectivity of the internet. So people are more connected than ever to function on that level. And I don't have an idea as what it's going to take.
It goes back to the same shit we talk about in a lot of our podcasts, just to kind of catch you up, is we always talk about Instagram stars and the charlatans, blah, 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 blah. But those are the people with the most influence. And it usually has to come down to someone or a group of people that have a way larger influence on the greater community to kind of elicit and demand those changes. Because let's just say Brad wants to change it from the bottom up, and Jillian Michaels wants to change it from the bottom up. I think Jillian Michaels is going to get a little bit more traction. Nothing against you, but she's built that. You know what I mean? And those people aren't doing those things. It's the Dr. Oz's who are driving that, and that's kind of where you have to flip the script. I have no answer for that.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like the Spider-Man quote, right, from Uncle Ben, where he says, "With great power comes great responsibility." There you go.
He's
Sorry,
You
man.
know, it's like
Yes.
I think a
worship
lot of these people
Spider-Man.
who are in positions of influence, in positions to actually make large changes. One, I think a lot of these people think they have more influence over substantial changes in societal behavior than they actually do, right? The super fit person on Instagram who's got 10 million followers, sure they can sell some supplements, but they're not actually, building anything of value to change people. And I think the other thing is when they do get into those positions, they need to understand that the message they craft can matter if they do it correctly. And that needs to be a little bit more focused on value driven from the outset and not financial driven.
That's the problem.
Well, the future is going to be really exciting to see.
Well, yeah.
We know that technology is going to shape things. Kind of going back to what you're saying about data collection, I wonder if we'll ever get to the point where, quite literally, people will be paranoid about this, but implanted with chips or like mini processors that link to our nervous system that will actually be able to record a lot of this data. And then what you said about like what shows sort of in these controlled studies versus what's going on in the real world, you'll get that kind of information from the real world that you can then actually take into, peer-reviewed research and use it. I think we're probably a long way off before we see that augmentation of humans with machine and cybernetics. But I mean, that's a theme we've seen all over science fiction for a really long time. But it will come, whether or not it will be embraced by society as a whole and everybody. That's a different story, but that shit's going to happen.
Well, the second it's like you said, the second that is able to happen and we're able to get those metrics, things are going to exponentially grow. Because once you start getting that real world data at the level that it needs to, it's just going to expand. Because once it's accessible, the information will just go. It's like when Google opened up all their metrics, and now things are just flooding, and they have way too many metrics to even deal with. But it has to start somewhere.
Yeah, and we've already started going down that road, right? So continuous glucose monitors are starting to they're being used by normal people, right? Not just people with diabetes. You've got some of these wearables that are starting to get a little more advanced, that are collecting a little more data, and so we're moving in that direction. The big hurdle with large scale, we'll just call it like basically collecting biometric data and all this stuff is going to be, getting it through the FDA. And then who gets to access that data, right? Can a private company put these things out and just collect this data? And then what happens? We're going to run into a lot of issues like that when we start to get into a lot of these health markers.
Do you think that and this is a false question because the scientists want that information. Do you think that information is going to happen regardless, and people are going to do with it what they want, and it's going to be a point where certain people are getting ahead of the science just because they have access to the metrics? Because you can't do anything without FDA approval. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, with the way things are going in government funding for science right now, is private industry is going to, probably in the next 20 years, be leaps and bounds ahead of government. In terms of direct application to people, right now, complete innovation of new technologies and new biotech is probably going to be largely driven by, government. So things like next gen sequencing, all that kind of like new technology will probably be driven more by, government funding, just because there's a lot more risk and private industry doesn't want to risk that kind of money right now. But the commercialization and application is going to be so much more driven by industry than by government. We're going to start to really enter the wild, wild west in the next 20 years.
Is that good or bad? And that's an honest question. And seriously, I'm sure it's a little bit of both. But what's your take on that?
It depends on what day of the week you ask me, right? If I've just gotten a grant review back and I'm like, God, I hate the government, then I'm like, yeah, it's great that the private industry. I think my fears are that there's a lot of times where we get really excited about things and we don't spend a lot of time thinking about the downstream repercussions. And I think private industry sometimes takes things a little bit too far too fast. Theranos, great example, right? They were a company that kind of promised some things. They got a little bit driven by money. It was a huge fiasco. People are going to prison. Billions of dollars were lost. Like, those are the type of things that when private industry gets involved in financial, gain is the main driver, is you start to get a lot of things like that. So I think there's pros and cons. One is speed of change, and the other one is there's going to be a lot of bumps and bruises along the way.
Yeah.
Well, let's pivot into something else that you said at the conference. So obviously, I just met Brad 2 weeks ago for the first time at this Inland Empire fitness conference that was hosted by our friend Tim Arndt. And James Krieger presented. We just had James on the podcast. So guys, if you're listening, James and Brad are good friends. James had a really wonderful episode. So that's one of the ones, if you're one of Brad's listeners who found us for the first time here, you might really enjoy the episode we did with James. It's a little different from a lot of the other stuff he did. So it's just a few episodes back. Totally worth checking out. And then if you like that, well, you can see. Because we work hard to bring on some great guests. But you described your hypothesis about intolerances in Spokane. And you said that people are driven to them. Could you explain that and why you feel like this is happening now all of a sudden?
Yeah. So I'll plant the flag right up front and say a lot of what I'm going to say is is my own thoughts about this, and some of it's not well supported, and this is just kind of me thinking based on some of my experiences and some of my background knowledge. Is a lot of I would say in the last 20 to 30 years, a lot of our dietary approaches have become much more restrictive, right? If you kind of look around and think about the last 20 or 30 years of dieting culture, most of them are, let's just remove food, and let's just remove food, and let's remove this food, and then if that's not working, let's remove another food. And so people's diets start to become very narrow, right? So people are kind of eating the same types of foods. They're removing any potential exposure to a variety of things. And we know that your body, especially your microbiome and your immune system, can adapt to what it's exposed to. And so I think when people start to have these super restrictive diets and then they introduce foods they haven't had in a while, that's where a lot of those food intolerances will manifest, right? And if you kind of think about it, there's some literature to support that. So there's evidence that kids who are exposed to things like peanuts or gluten or things like that really early, their likelihood of developing a food sensitivity or a food allergy later on is reduced. We do know that if you consume like a very low carbohydrate, high fat, moderate protein diet, your microbiome changes and your ability to digest large amounts of carbohydrates, substantially gets reduced. And so I think a lot of people, when they start to develop these restrictive diets, they're reducing their body's robustness to actually handle a wide variety of foods. And I think that may be one of the reasons we're starting to see a lot more people who've been kind of in the 20-year dieting cycle starting to manifest with more quote-unquote food intolerances.
That makes sense.
That makes tons of sense. I suspect as well that, we know this, people like to identify with ideologies. They like to belong to tribes. They like to belong to things. And they like to belong to dietary ideology, but they also like to have... when gluten became this big thing, probably 6-7 years ago, is kind of like when that really blew up. And then a lot of people going around saying that they were gluten intolerant and variations of that. And I think people are self-diagnosing because people like to have, I don't want to say disorders, but they like to have things. And
they get primed by it. Like if they buy into that, their brain, like they're being told and their brain is being primed to be like, oh yeah, this is happening. Then they just think and they make up things. And I'm not saying that they're making up things, but that goes back to that whole ideology thing, but they're buying into it so much that they, like you said, they're building intolerances because they buy into a system so well that they don't even veer outside of, there's no variability outside of those systems. Does that make sense?
And earlier I mentioned that we had Sarah Ashburn on, and so we'll release yours in about 2 weeks. So when you're listening to this today, 2 weeks ago, we had Sarah Ashburn on the episode, and she actually, like I said, talked about gut microbiome, and she talked about exactly what you did and how, I think specifically she said that pregnant women who grow up on farms Then, of course, Dee gets into this crazy thing about Japanese pregnancy farm petting zoos and all sorts of weird shit.
So without getting too sidetracked, because we're already sidetracked, is that women need to expose themselves to petting zoos so that they can be exposed to things.
But women who actually are pregnant and are around farms and farm animals and a lot of that sort of stuff, you see almost no incidence of most of these food intolerances that have become more common, and there were lower rates of autism too, which was kind of interesting. So there's a bunch of stuff that just simply the kids were growing up, as you said, more robust.
Yeah, and I would say kind of to sum up my thoughts is, one of the things when we try to work with people is our goal is not to build this hyper restrictive, very sensitive human. It's how can we build a robust human who can handle a lot of different things, and still get results that they're aiming for without trying to make somebody super fragile.
Well, and people buy into the fact that they're super fragile too. Does that make sense? Like when they don't get that variability, they just believe that they're super fragile, and they're like they can't do anything else.
Yeah, it's kind of like one of the ways I think about it, because I spend a lot of time doing math and statistics. Is it's like if you think about like local minimum and maximum, right? Is somebody will do something and they'll get in like this valley, and then anytime they try to move out of that, they just sink right back to the right spot because they haven't gotten up over the hump to the next place.
What would be some? So this might be something that's actionable. What, in your opinion, are some actionable strategies to like get over that valley? Because obviously people are hitting a roadblock somewhere. Like, how would you define that roadblock and how to get past it?
A lot of them are, I'll kind of give you the most simple answer is take a much longer term view of what you're trying to deal with, right? So, for example, when we have clients who come to us who've been eating 1,300 calories a day, and they're like, I don't want to diet forever. I want to be able to do all these things. And I'm like, okay, well, we're going to have to get your calorie intake up. And then over the next 6, 8, 12 weeks, your body weight's going to fluctuate. It's going to go up a few pounds, right? You're going to be, whether that's fat mass or glycogen storage or whatever it is, you've got to kind of get over that initial hurdle and take a much longer view of the issue. I think a lot of people get focused in like, I have to stay where I am, and any progress that's not, perfectly in line with where I want to go, that's the biggest way people constrain themselves, is they take such a short-term view of whatever they're doing that they can't see past the long term.
What's been your best, and this is the truth because most people don't want to buy into that strategy. How have you been able to convince people to take that longer or bird's eye view of that approach? Like, in what's the fastest way, I guess, that you found?
The best way is if you can show them like somebody else who's exactly like them, who's done what you've wanted them to do, and they end up where they want to be, right? So that's one of the biggest tools we have is, we've got thousands of clients' data files. I can just send my clients like, this was you 2 years ago, and look where this person is now. This is what your journey is going to look like over the next 12 to 18 weeks. But if we can get through this is where it's going to be. So I think a lot of it is just showing people that on the other side of this is where you want to be.
Do you ever message them after and be like, boom, it's fucking science, bro? Because you have a PhD, or do you ever drop that, like, I'm a freaking PhD, dude. You think I would tell you something that's not real? Like, that's what
no.
I'm school for, man. Like, why don't you use it?
He's not Lane. He's not Lane Norton.
I try to avoid the I told you so as much as possible.
Would you pay for all that school for? That would be like the only reason I could get my PhD, just so I could literally just make stuff up and be like, I'm right. Like, PhD. Sorry, I like to crack jokes. Being so involved, so we're talking science, but you're involved in a lot of current research, especially with nutrition. Where do you feel a lot of this science or research is going to progress over the next several years, and kind of the big implications, I want to say on fat loss, but kind of the greater nutrition fitness world?
I can tell you where, I'll give you two answers. I'll tell you where I think it's going to go, and I'll tell you where I want it to go. And they are very, very divergent. So I think we're going to spend a lot of time chasing down a lot of, like, now that we have new technology, right? Everybody just wants to use new technology because it's sexy, it's cool, it's got big words. I think we're going to spend a lot of time going down the kind of nutrigenomics path, right? We're going to be doing a lot of DNA typing and RNA sequencing and trying to like match diet to individual people. And I think we're going to probably spend $500 million over the next 10 years trying to figure that out. And I think it's going to tell us very, very little about what's actually going to help people.
Yeah.
And so that's one of my big fears. And I think that's where we're going to go, but I don't think it's going to be super fruitful. And then the second piece, go ahead, Andrew.
So let's hit on that DNA testing, because we see a lot of social media people talking about DNA testing for dietary type. And I'm a little skeptical of this sort of stuff. There are definitely fitness professionals selling this. And of course, there's a financial incentive behind promoting these sort of ideas. What is the current state right now of DNA testing in terms of its value?
Its validity.
Its validity. Thank you.
Yeah. So there's kind of a few ways to think about it. One is, right now we have some very, very preliminary ideas of specific, we call them SNPs, right? Single nucleotide polymorphisms, that are associated with gene expression that can be tied to some part of metabolism. Now, what we know about that currently is that is not very predictive of how your body responds to any dietary intervention, right? We're talking any single one has maybe 1 to 5% at most of explanatory value. Now, all of them combined, like let's say you took a whole panel, even that right now is very, very small. So if I kind of like rank a hierarchy and put like all the things I know about nutrition and results, is nutrigenomics is so far down the totem pole. I wouldn't even consider having any of my clients tested for it.
It's going to lead to where you want it to go.
Yeah.
Because you just don't think about where it's going. In a roundabout way.
So what I would rather see is spending more time, energy, and money on the structure of society, right? And how do we change our food environment? How do we change what we value? How do we change our approach to food? How do we change our approach to physical activity? I think those things are what pay off. I think the focus on some of these really hyper-focused molecular basis of this stuff is not going to get us where we need to go. There's going to be a lot of money made in Silicon Valley. There's going to be a lot of biotech companies that raise a lot of money and CEOs get some fat paychecks off of it. But personally, I don't know if it's going to really tell us a whole lot from the big problems we have.
Can you kind of speak a little bit to like even some of the specifics of those foundational changes that even give us like 1 or 2 examples, just because I'm trying to piece it together. I kind of get what you're saying, but I just want some specifics and what you think would be ideal.
Yeah. So also maybe start with an anecdote and like a story of mine that kind of got me thinking on this. So when I was in college, I heard a lot about this idea of like the food desert piece, right? Of, there's places in the world where accessing, good actual food is really difficult. And I was like, that's a bunch of baloney. It's just about effort. People just don't care. And then I spent a week in Indiana at the university, the medical school there, doing some training. And like I flew in, I got a rental car, and I was like, I'm going to go to the grocery store so I can get some food for the week. And I went into a grocery store. This was like just outside of Indianapolis, kind of in a lower socioeconomic neighborhood. And there was literally like 2 bags of lettuce, an apple, and 1 banana, like in the whole store. And the rest of it was, rice-a-roni, canned soup, Spam, boxed everything. And so when you start to look at these pockets of the world who have obesity issues, who have diabetes issues, is this food culture around there is so different from what it should be. And so I think, when I talk about kind of restructuring, the whole underbelly, is how do we start to shift our food choices in stores? How do we start to change how restaurants approach food? How do we change our family interactions to approach food? Like the amount of people who eat out versus eat at home today versus 30 years ago, and how many people have family meals today versus 30 years ago. It's all those pieces that are really what drive a lot of what we see.
I agree. I feel like I'm such a pessimist, but it's just like, I get exactly what you're saying, and I know exactly why they do it. it's just because that's what's incentivized. Like the companies, like even when we talk about big industry and stuff, is that how do you convince them that being better makes money? You know what I mean?
Well, and I think it's
fucked.
I mean, I also think about like my own hypocrisy in this too, right? Is if I think about like, okay, what do I need to do to like make my life so I can do those things? Is I'd have to work less. I'd have to, not worry about making as much money. I'd have to, prioritize family and being home and, cooking meals versus trying to be successful, right? And so we're basically pushing our individual narratives and our society narratives away from what's optimally healthy. And we have to decide as a society of what do we value more. And it's very clear currently what we value more.
Since we're on technology, just is there anything that you can see in the future that would help create change in that direction via technology? And that might be a loaded or an unknown question, but I'm just thinking like ways of making things more efficient or productive in that sense.
We're starting to get some inklings, things like, this is kind of a dumb example, but things like HelloFresh or Blue Apron, right, where you can start to get a little more convenience packaged with a little more health and a little more somebody else is doing the conscious thinking of how you can approach healthy food and making it convenient for you. Yeah. And I think we're starting to try to do those things. So, those are the types of things that we can kind of use to say, okay, we've gone so far down this path, we're never going to go fully backwards. But how can we take the new technology and tools we have and start to build in some of these principles from what was a more healthy society and bringing them into the current day?
I think you're also going to see, we are starting to see now more home delivery of groceries. Costco, I just saw something, they announced that they're going to be doing home delivery. Oh my God, that's going to change my life because
they probably do that in the States.
Yeah.
Canada just gets behind.
So, and then what you have is the ability to, people still have to choose these foods, but you have the ability to deliver to you and take that trip out of your day or week or whatever to bring more of that healthy food at home. You still have to choose that food, but at least there's got to be a big convenience there. I know that
no rice-a-roni.
I'm far from a normal average person in how I approach nutrition compared to what's walking around and the people who are trying to help. But even still, I know that's going to be a big game changer for me. It's going to make me more time efficient, and if I can actually quite literally check off a list of things that I want and order it, and even further into the future, because we keep talking about this is something that's going to be real. Our fridges will be stocked with sensors, and as we get low on the eggs and whatever other things that we program in there, those things will get ordered.
It's Amazon, man.
Amazon's going to be delivering that shit in drones.
But I think that's a real. That's not like fucking, it's in the future. Like I think
that's
they're
not sci-fi.
They're testing out delivery for food via their freaking drones, correct?
Yeah.
And there's that whole debate about giving Amazon the ability to open your door and come into your house, which I think freaks a lot of people out. But
let them in. We're in Canada. The doors are open here. I don't know about you.
I'd like to see what my cat does to one of the drones if it flies into the house.
Okay, a lot of what we're talking about really comes down to, like you said, foundational stuff. But the essence of what we're doing is trying to help people find happiness, and we could easily argue that most people go about it wrong. From your vantage point, your experience, what do you feel is the most important piece of the puzzle for people to find happiness and fulfillment, and kind of link it back to all the stuff we're talking about here?
So if we kind of take it from the lens of like our health and fitness industry, and one of the sayings, this might tie in a little bit of, we sometimes say to our clients is, you can't hate yourself lean. And I kind of use that as, you can't rely on some external goal, some sort of thing you're chasing to drive your happiness. Is, you've got to kind of start internally with that piece. And, a lot of that comes down to just how you view yourself and how you approach, what actually matters to you in life. And so, a lot of the books and a lot of the conversation is like, 10 ways to optimize your life to be happy. And it talks about like morning rituals and all this stuff and all these, whatever it is, or all these external pieces, which are tools you can use to kind of help change the way you think about things. But I think a lot of it just comes down to, your own internal monologue of happiness. And I think so much of the issues that we have right now are, we don't spend a lot of time with that internal monologue. Like, think about your daily life of how often are you kind of alone in your thoughts and actually think about who you are as a person. I mean, it's literally 24 hours a day, external messages telling you about how you should be.
Yeah, and we it's funny enough, we literally talked about this probably for an hour with Nick Sorrell. Just about that idea of happiness and problems, and even you mentioned people being happy with their bodies and all that stuff, and what are they really, what's the real problem behind the real problem, and who are they really, and it kind of goes down to fishing that out, but that's a hard thing to do, if that makes sense.
It's a very hard thing to do.
Inner monologue, because people don't want to know what that is a lot of the time. That's why they don't. That's why they do all these things to not feel those things.
I like what Brad said about, like we got all this external stuff coming at us. We're so interconnected. I've read a few books that sort of talk about even just like taking 5 to 10 minutes when you first wake up in the morning to sort of pause. Don't reach for the email. Don't reach for the device. Some people say meditate or just like think about your day, what have you. That could actually be a really amazing exercise for some people. And even I find, like, just my mind lately, especially with how busy everything's been, my mind is just busy and cluttered. And it's always like, all right, I got to knock down this, then I got to knock down this, I got to do this stuff. And then by the end of the day, when I get home, it's like I don't have much time to cook in or whatever the hell I'm trying to do for the next day. And it's like, okay, got to go to bed. You feel like you want to squeeze in a little relaxing time. But maybe we would be better off if we actually thought about some of that relaxing time as some time away from the console, away from the TV or the video games or the devices, and actually just introspectively think about what's going on with you inside your own head. So,
I mean, like how much time do you spend working on like you, right? Even when you're reading self-help books and you're trying to do, you're working out at the gym, all this kind of stuff that's still all external, right? Like, how much time do you spend like thinking about you in your head and like, okay, here's who I am, here's how I respond to things, here's what I think about myself, here's why I think about these things, here's how I can change those things. I would say most of us spend zero time doing that.
And we'll continue on that piece just because you have a business around this kind of stuff. Have you been finding like getting people to answer those questions has had a deeper success with some of, I guess, your weight loss clients, so to speak?
Yeah, two things. And this is one area we're still trying to figure out as a business is that internal monologue is really key for people's long-term success, right? I mean, that's pretty obvious, I think, to all of us. But what that does do is that forces people into a decision of is this who I am and what I want to do, or am I just going to cut tail and run, right? So it's like you've got 1,000 clients, and you force these. Normally they would just kind of hang on, they'd stay around for 6 months, whatever. Yeah. But if you kind of force the issue and say, okay, we got to deal with this, you got to have this conversation with yourself. Now people are like, well, I can't hide anymore. I got to go.
Yeah.
And so you kind of play that battle too. But I think it's very. It's one of those things where you can either be a patch job and a Band-Aid, like the Fitbit or the MyFitnessPal, or you can really try to address the underlying issues.
And I like that a lot because I think that, like you said, people get to a point if you're working with them and trying to inch them towards long-term successes, if they really want to understand the things that they need to understand for long-term success. Now, I want to tie this into science and kind of your background. Have you found, and this is going to be hard to tie this in, not scientific research, because there's obviously scientific research on psychology, but have you found anything that ties in science of that aspect of it into long-term success dieting? Does that make sense?
I
think it's pretty hard because it's not new and blah, blah, blah.
Has it been empirically validated?
Empirically, sorry, I'm trying to use scientific terms, but yeah.
I think it's one of those scenarios where if you kind of line up all the logic in your head, it's like, well, this is a slam dunk, right? But I don't think anybody's ever actually tested that because, one, how do you test that? Yeah. Like, I can't imagine taking a study of a lot of people and like doing deep psychotherapy with them and like quantifying where their mental state is and trying to track their diet long term. I will never sign up to do that study.
I'm glad that was your answer because that's what I assumed. How can technology possibly piece some of that together? And that's an honest question, because that's kind of where things should go logically if you think about it. But is there a point in time where that could be something?
So that's one of my big, my existential crisis in doing all this, right, is technology drives people the opposite way, right? Is it drives them to all this external stuff of here's data, here's numbers, do this, do that, get up at this time, do this workout, et cetera, et cetera. And so how do we pair that with trying to change the human element too?
Yeah. That's hard, man. Because we're agreeing that that's where it needs to go, but then you're a scientist.
Yeah, and we have almost no answers in this area.
Fuck, man. Jesus.
Let's take that word agreement. So, our industry, and Brad, I saw you comment on this, Dean. Our industry recently had a collective aneurysm arguing about burpees. So Dean Somerset did a post about it. Someone else did some before that.
Sam Spinelli.
There was an article, I think it was reshared, and then you did a post. So everybody was basically just having this meltdown over it. And I saw people that I like and respect arguing with each other, and I saw some snide shit. Like, what the hell? Okay. So obviously, our industry loves arguing over trivialities. It's not new. But for the most part, our corner of the industry agrees on most things. What are some critical nutritional concepts that our industry really does agree on, excluding the charlatans who are selling bullshit, but that people can actually feel pretty safe about? Is there anything that foundational pillars that people can say, yes, this is as close to certain as we can say?
Mostly true.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of, I would say most things are agreed upon. And I mean, things like calories really matter, right? That's the big driving factor. Anybody who doesn't agree with that has completely missed the boat, right? Like they had the opportunity to jump on the lifeboat in the Titanic, and they pulled the I'm just gonna go down because I'm the captain of the ship, right? So that's number one. The other one that's become very clear is almost all diets will work, right? It doesn't really matter what your macronutrient profile is. I mean, even large deviations don't really tend to have a big difference when it comes to body weight loss. That's one. Another one is, how do I word this? There are no real specific diets that are optimal for reducing disease risk, right? I mean, chronic diseases, cardiovascular disease, Alzheimer's, obesity, diabetes, et cetera, et cetera. The exact nutrient profile you consume does not have substantial changes in risk, right? There's minor risk changes based on, the exact type of fats you consume, the exact type of carbohydrates, the exact type of proteins, but the relative changes in risk are still pretty small, right? And the cumulative quality of your diet is, it matters quite a bit.
A old friend of mine, it was really weird. I had posted a status recently about what people thought would be the next fad diet to come around, because sort of keto is the big one right now. And it was sort of the tail end of all the comments because there were tons. But one guy got in there and sort of a righteous sort of thing about paleo and keto and how they did all this sort of stuff for some sort of intolerances and whatnot. And he, of course, there's an argument ensued, and he cherry-picked one study that didn't seem like it was even calorie controlled that supposedly proved that paleo was better for reducing metabolic syndrome, which wasn't related to his original point. So you see some of this sort of stuff, but again, people like to pick things that fit their ideology about stuff. But I was pretty sure
people like to argue, man. So this is funny. We're talking about like what to be true and people arguing over shit and blah blah blah. Dean didn't even post an argument. He's like, "Oh, what's this whole thing about burpees?" And everyone interjected. Like, and they do that with nutrition.
Well, Dean's a shit herber like that. He's very good at not necessarily taking a hard stance on some stuff and setting it loose and then seeing what the hell happens. He pours gas all over.
Let's ask this: do you ever and maybe we should check back through Facebook. Do you ever get fired up about shit and like get?
He doesn't seem.
My
guy who doesn't, but you're like saying in your head, or you'll say it behind their back.
So this will be funny. So I would say as my life has progressed, the amount of time I spend arguing with people on Facebook has plummeted. Just because I mean, other shit's more important to me, right? But I do spend. Here's how I handle it: is whenever I see things that fire me up, I go in there, I write a response, and then I delete it before I hit enter, and I feel immensely better. And I'm like, God, the catharsis is real. But now I don't have to get involved in this shit
After
story.
this, I want to hear stories. Okay, you're thinking back to when you were in college because you probably thought you were really smart before you had a PhD. You probably know way more than you did then or now. Did you get in any arguments that you can kind of think of and you're like, fuck, I'm an idiot? I know you did because Facebook, we're like at the same age, so Facebook would have been blowing up, and that's when people got on there and like just argued with everyone they want to be smart. Tell us what.
Oh yeah. Oh man. Let's see. I remember, and this was on my website, is Feynman, one of the low carb guys, had a big comment on my website, like in the comment section, and I spent like 6 hours going back and forth with this guy. And then like the next morning I woke up and I was like, oh my God, that accomplished absolutely nothing. So since then I have not allowed, I've like, I should pull it up. I think I have like 17,000 comments waiting on my website that I just haven't even approved. I just don't allow comments anymore because I'm like, I'm just not going there anymore.
Are you? He's a PhD, so you're a doctor. Anyone ever give you like a good nickname? Because Dr. Spencer Nadolsky had someone go on his Instagram and call him Dr. Fuckwad.
That's what we talked about in this episode. Spencer, actually, anyone who's listening to this episode, especially who is really into the nutritional side and the disease side, stuff like that, go and check out the Spencer one. Or if you haven't ever heard of Dr. Spencer Nadolsky, which is ludicrous, go check this guy out because he's brilliant. And
one more question about this shit. Do you, and be honest, do you found that going up through that and arguing and stuff, did you get smarter through that situation? And not that it wasted time, but like, I think Alan Aragon's like, that's how I got the smartest. Is I had to go argue people, and I went fucking figured out the shit so I could beat them.
You know, I'm a big believer in you learn when you're listening, you don't learn when you're talking. So I spend like, I will go read these things, but I don't really chime in. You know, maybe that's just my personality, but you know, watching and listening to people have debates and arguments is super helpful. You know, for me, I find being in the middle of them are not super instructive. You know, because people won't tell you this, but when you're in an argument with somebody, no matter who you are, no matter how educated you are, no matter how open-minded you are, your subconscious is protecting your ego, and you're always, always, always going to find the way to defend your point that you brought up a priori, right? So you're just going to do, no matter how good you are, you're going to spend all your energy trying to prove your point. And so I find for me, going and reading those things can be super helpful. Being in the trenches in them, not helpful at all.
Your intuitive brain will just like fulfill its bias because once you get there, you don't even know. You can't get out.
Nick Tuminello was another speaker in Spokane, and we talked. Hopefully, we'll be able to get him on in a not too distant future. He said he'd like to do it. He really blew me away with crystallizing a thought about arguing with people on the internet, and he really doesn't do much of this anymore. He'll have private conversations with people he respects, but he said that if you're responding to trolls and critics and really engaging in deep debates, especially if you're trying to convince them of your point of view, well, first of all, those are not paying clientele. And you are communicating to your paying clientele that the best way to get your attention and to engage you and to learn from you is to not pay you, but to troll on your social media and comments. And you devote a lot of your time and energy into that instead of taking your time and energy into people fucking paying you for your services. It's like, holy shit, that makes a ton of sense. So I think that's a good thing for anyone who is a fitness professional to think about when you are drawn into a lot of these arguments. And again, like you said, they're a fucking time sink and a complete waste of time.
I don't do it, FYI. I just wanted to ask. I'm you now, or I'm what you are, and I just like listening.
He wants a PhD too, Brad. I think he's probably gonna start
I think I'm
being more Brad-like.
Yeah, I kind of going on this topic of people like contacting on social media. This morning, my phone rang, and it was a number that I didn't know, and I usually don't answer it, but it was from like the same area code as the NIH, so I answer it, and this is the first time this has ever happened. Somebody called my phone from an article they had read on my website, and they said, "Hey, I have a question. Why do pretzels make my mouth taste sour?" And I was just like, "What?" So it's just like that kind of stuff. I'm just like, we live in a bizarre world. I said, you know what? I have no idea. Why don't you send me an email and we'll see what we can figure out. But I was just like, we live in such a strange world that those are the types of conversations we have with people.
My phone is
Okay, turn it off.
It's probably the same guy. He probably like, why pretzels?
Well, shit like this happens. Like I was, I told this somewhere. I hope I didn't tell this in the podcast already, but I got a phone call from Yemen, and nothing good is coming out of Yemen. Let's be honest. So, and I looked at the number and it's like, all right, this is a scam thing. I've heard of this stuff. And so I'm chatting with my best friend via text, and then it turns around that like an hour later sends me a screenshot, and sure enough, she got a same phone call from the same fucking number an hour later out of Yemen. It was the weirdest fucking thing. So
What does that have to do with pretzels in the morning?
it has to do with phone calls.
Oh, okay. It's probably that same person. They're just getting through the network.
Right.
Someone wouldn't answer the question. You didn't answer it. It's going to. He's going to phone James Krieger now.
Yeah.
You should have gave him a call. That's what you should have did.
I should have said, here's James's number.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so
hit him up with the smart one.
We're at the point now where we need a sponsorship from like Chapters, which is a Canadian book company, or Barnes & Noble or Audible, for all the books that we talk about. Do you have a memorable book that you found personally relevant to share with us? It's really about me because I just want books, but I know the audience likes the books too.
I mean, I read such a random variety of books, and kind of, I'm one of those people where it's like, I don't have one thing in my life that's ever like stood out, but there's always things that are very contextually appropriate. And I would say, some of probably two of the biggest books that have had an impact on me over the last couple of years, and it's been more related to like, trying to build a large business and dealing with all the stuff that comes with it, is Extreme Ownership was really good. Just more along the lines of, trying to take as much control and ownership over things as possible. I think, at least for me, when I was growing up, a lot of my approach was things are not my fault. And so I think that was a really good eye-opening book, for a lot of reasons. I mean, whenever you help run a large business, shit hits the fan every day, and you've kind of got two approaches: is you can own it, you can solve it, or you can say not my problem. The other one would be The Obstacle is the Way by Ryan Holiday.
Yes.
That might be cliche, but it's always a good reminder of, two things. Is one, the joke of, having a boat that you retire on, is that's not really what life is all about, right? Like, life is really about tackling obstacles, and understanding that your real joy in life comes from tackling those obstacles. And the other really key message from that book is, with each obstacle you pass, the next one just gets harder, right? And so you don't really ever get to a point where, as you kind of knock down these goals and get these obstacles out of the way, and you move forward, problems don't get easier. Problems get harder and more complex, and you each time have to rise to some new level to try to challenge it. So, I mean, like, when I started out and I had 2 private clients, the issues there were different when I had 10 versus when, you're running a, multi-six-figure dollar company, right? Like, just the substantial issues you face along each step of the way get incrementally bigger. And if you can kind of put your mindset into, as soon as I tackle this one, I'm going to be faced with the next big one, it kind of helps you handle a lot of the stuff that comes along your way and gets dropped on your plate.
That was one of the ones, like, if I think back to, like, if people ask me, or if I give it unsolicited advice all the time, I'll refer to that one a lot, because it's a very simple message, but it applies contextually to almost every context you could even think of. You know what I mean? And it's a good way to reframe people's brains when they are upset about an obstacle or something in their way, and you just reframe it and they're like, oh, yeah, that makes sense. And it makes sense. I think that's the best reason why that book's awesome, because it makes logical sense, really.
It's one of what I call my core 4 books. I recommend it to everybody. Everybody should read that book. I read it at a critical time when I was transitioning my career, moving from being an employee of a large gym chain to working privately. And some of the crap that expedited my move turns out to be some of the and it was ridiculous bullshit, but it was actually the best thing that ever happened. I'm super glad, despite the discomfort of it at the time, because it kicked me into doing something that has been so much better. So, guys, like, those 2 books and Extreme Ownership, I totally buy it. Exactly the same thing you did. The more ownership you will take over you being responsible for your clients, for everything that goes on around you, the more control you'll exert over it. And for the people listening who are more of our enthusiasts, if you spend all your time blaming the world, I can't do this because it's this, blah, 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 that's a good road to failure in the grand scheme of things. If you will take ownership, I don't like saying blame, but if you will accept, hey, I'm responsible for the things that have happened to me, I am responsible for what I currently am in life, then you have the ability to turn around and say, I can be responsible for my decisions to affect the future outcome. And that is a good place to start to see positive changes if you want to lose weight.
Andrew likes that book, FYI.
Well, they're both.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of like just a control and a power thing, right? Is if you kind of take ownership or responsibility of the situation you're in, you can do something about it, right? But if you decide it's not under your control, then you can't do anything about it, right? So even if you're in a bad environment, you've got an abusive family or anything like that, is you're like, okay, I don't have control or responsibility over the situation, but I do have control and responsibility over how I decide to get out of this situation or how I decide to move forward. And I think that's one of the big things too, is it's not just about taking blame for everything. It's more of owning the situation and kind of taking control of it.
Cool. Guys, you're gonna love those, so read them.
Where can our audience find you? So if someone wants to consume all stuff you, work with you, understand and realize how smart you are, where is that place for Brad?
I'm probably one of the most easily accessible people on the planet. Our coaching business is eattoperform.com. You can go there. We have a ton of blog articles. You can sign up. We give everybody a 2-week free trial. So anybody can just come in and sign up. And then you can find my writing at Science Driven Nutrition. So that's kind of my, specific blog where I write a lot of my own thoughts and ideas. And you can find me on PubMed for all my research stuff. And then Facebook, you can find me. I spend virtually zero time on Twitter just because I find it largely unhelpful and an intellectual cesspool. So, but those are the places you can find me.
Oh, there's a ton of great sound bites from this one. Good thing we've already picked the title of it. There's so many. We're going to call this episode Intellectual Cesspool. In fact, I'm almost...
We've been lately tying things into movie references, and we got a good one for you.
Yes, I live my life in movie
Do
quotes.
you like Back to the Future? Like, you're our age-ish.
Oh, yeah. I grew up on that movie.
So we're probably going to call it Jacked into the Future, and I'm going to splash your face over Marty McFly looking at his watch. So that'll be your graphic. We've had a lot
That
of really
would be
good
awesome.
Because the James Krieger one was sweet. You saw that one, right?
That one was really good.
Yeah, that one went really well.
You look more like a Bond, though.
He totally does look more like a Bond than Krieger does.
Yeah, like we fucked that one up. Not to say
Yeah, but I don't
Krieger's
have
not
the
a-
first name James, so...
Yeah. You have a more marketable Bond look. But we made him feel powerful, I'm sure.
All right.
So if somebody listening to this wants to sponsor me with an Aston Martin, I would not be upset. We'll just leave it at that.
Watch now, a Walter,
Man, you just told us that's not what life's about.
a Walter PBK
your
will
own
show up in the
personal
mail
gains.
instead.
Cool. I guess that's it.
Yeah, guys, thank you so much for tuning into this one and enjoy it. You could hear it in our voices. This one was a lot of fun. Brad, thanks so much for coming on. This has been a blast. When I asked Brad about coming on here, and it was actually James Krieger that said, hey, you got to get Brad on here. He was super stoked and excited about it. And you can tell, like, with certain people, like, they're just so, like, yeah, like, I really want to do this.
Let's
like,
fuck shit up.
That is cool. Like, that means a lot because, like, we just got this little outfit and, started it with no big ambitions for anything. And our download numbers have actually been kind of ludicrous. So that's been fun and hopefully continues to grow. And for everybody listening who, started with us and is finding Brad, seriously, go follow some of his stuff. It might resonate with you. He's really brilliant. He's nowhere near as like pushing himself out there as he should be because he's got so much smart and good stuff to say. So a lot of times the loudest voices aren't always the best in our industry. Some of them are great, but most of the time, a lot of the people are really high profile. They're not the ones that are going to help you provide the quality of it or knowledge. So follow the people that we're bringing on here. We're very careful in who we select for this podcast. And the people on this podcast can probably change your life if you listen closely to them. So thanks for listening. We really appreciate it. And, if you like what you see, subscribe to us. 5-star reviews are amazing on iTunes, and we'll say goodbye now.
Yeah, take it easy.